"Ma'am, you can't just walk into someone's house like that," I said, but it was too late. Karen had already stepped inside my kitchen as if she owned the place. Her shoes squeaked against my tile floor, eyes darting around like she was searching for buried treasure. "I'm just conducting an inspection," she said, holding her clipboard high like it was some badge of authority. The audacity almost made me laugh, but I didn't. I just watched, sipping my coffee, letting her dig her own grave. She didn't know she had just broken into the home of the police chief. And in that moment I decided not to stop her. Not yet. The quiet before justice is always the most satisfying part. The morning had started peaceful, sun streaming through the blinds, bacon sizzling on the stove, my dog napping near the door. Then I heard the creak of the back door. No knock, no call-out, just the slow sound of hinges opening. My first instinct was to reach for my holster, but when I peeked around the corner and saw Karen in her pastel cardigan and oversized sunglasses, I realized this wasn't a threat. This was something worse. An HOA invasion. She started talking to herself, mumbling about code violations and unsanctioned modifications. Then she took out her phone and began snapping pictures of my appliances. "Illegal refrigerator color," she muttered. "Illegal refrigerator color." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from laughing. I stayed quiet, leaning against the doorway, curious how far she'd go. Karen strutted around the kitchen, then into the living room, where my awards and commendations hung on the wall. "What's this?" she said, zooming in on my framed commendation from the governor. "Unauthorized signage?" She scribbled something on her clipboard. That's when she noticed the door to my home office was locked. I could see the gears turning in her head. Without hesitation, she knelt down, pulled a tiny keyring from her purse, and started testing random keys. Who carries that many keys unless they expect to break into people's homes regularly? I finally spoke. "You find what you're looking for?" I said casually. She jumped, spinning around like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh," she gasped. "You startled me. You should announce yourself when someone's inside." "Someone's inside my own house?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." She tried to smile, but it cracked. "We received multiple complaints about your property, sir. Possible code infractions. Improper fencing, non-standard paint colors, unauthorized vehicle storage." I gestured toward the window, where my marked police SUV sat in the driveway. "Unauthorized vehicle?" She squinted at it. "Yes. HOA guidelines prohibit commercial vehicles overnight." I took a slow sip of coffee. "That's a police cruiser." "Yes," she said with a tone dripping in condescension, "but the rules apply to everyone." The arrogance in her voice could have powered the entire county. Then she walked right past me and tried another key on the office door. "You really shouldn't," I started, but before I could finish, the lock clicked. She smiled proudly, pushing the door open. Inside were my files, my gear, and on the desk, my open badge case. She froze. For a long second, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Her mouth opened slightly. I could see the realization hit her like a freight train. "You're a police chief," I said softly. "And you just broke into my home office without a warrant or consent." The color drained from her face. She started backing up, clutching her clipboard like a shield. I thought you thought wrong." My voice stayed calm, steady, the way it always does before I cuff someone. "You've been trespassing for 15 minutes. You picked a lock. You took photos of private property. That's not an inspection, that's a crime." She stammered, her words tangling. This is just a misunderstanding. The HOA has authority." "Karen," I said, "the HOA can tell people what color to paint their fences, not what doors to unlock in their houses." I could see her hands trembling. Outside, a couple of my neighbors had gathered near my driveway, hearing the raised voices. Karen glanced at them, panic in her eyes. She tried to regain control, smoothing her hair, straightening her blouse. "Let's not blow this out of proportion," she said, her tone suddenly sweet. "I was just doing my job." I gestured to the camera in the corner of the room. My home security system disagrees. Her head snapped up. The little red light blinked steadily. She took a shaky breath, looking at me like she was trying to read how much I knew. You can't use that footage against me. This is private HOA business. I almost smiled. You entered my home without consent on camera, while identifying yourself as an HOA representative. That's not private business. That's evidence. For the first time, she seemed speechless. She dropped her clipboard. Papers scattered across the floor, lists of violations she'd written about me. Overgrown grass. Improper mailbox font. Suspicious equipment. My patience was thinning. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You know what the law says about unlawful entry, right? She nodded faintly, eyes darting to the badge on my belt. Good, I said. Then you know you're in real trouble. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean any harm. Intent doesn't erase the crime, I said. But don't worry. I'll handle this the right way. She looked like she might faint. Handle it? Oh yeah, I said. You're going to learn how the law actually works. As I turned to open the front door, I could already hear whispers from outside, neighbors asking what was happening. Karen's name was on every tongue. She had spent years controlling this neighborhood, bossing everyone around with her clipboard and fake authority. But now she was trapped in her own web. I stepped aside, motioning toward the door. After you. She hesitated, humiliated but terrified to argue. The crowd outside parted as we stepped out. Everything okay, Chief? One of the neighbors asked, trying to hide a smirk. I nodded slowly. Oh, everything's fine. Just a routine inspection. Karen's face burned red as laughter rippled through the group. She mumbled something about miscommunication, and practically ran down the driveway. I watched her go, already thinking ahead. She'd try to spin this, twist it into something she could control. But what she didn't know was that every second of her little adventure had been caught in 4K with sound. I took one last sip of coffee, looked at the blinking camera light, and whispered, "Game on." The neighborhood hadn't been that alive in months. By the time Karen stormed out of my house, the entire block was watching like it was the season finale of their favorite show. She tried to walk fast, pretending not to notice the stares, but the tremble in her hands gave her away. I stayed calm, leaning against the porch rail with my coffee, watching her head straight into the mess she had made. 10 minutes later, the HOA group chat started blowing up. Neighbors who once feared her were suddenly sending popcorn emojis, and screenshots of her barging into my home were circulating faster than gossip in a small-town diner. I didn't post them myself, someone else beat me to it. Maybe one of the folks who'd been fined for shade discrepancies on their shutters. Karen had made enemies in every direction, and now they smelled blood. I could have ended it there. But when you've been in law enforcement long enough, you learn that people like her never stop at embarrassment. They double down, twist the story, and try to rewrite the truth. By noon, she was already pacing her front yard, phone glued to her ear, talking loud enough for the entire block to hear. He invited me in, she was saying, her voice shaky but defiant. I was helping with a safety concern. He's exaggerating. That line made me laugh out loud. Invited her in? Sure. Because that's what people do. Invite HOA presidents to come snoop through their drawers. I knew what she was doing. Building her defense, setting the stage before the real fallout hit. Then, as if on cue, Greg pulled up in his luxury SUV. Stepping out in a crisp suit like this was a courtroom. Her husband, the HOA's legal counsel, looked around the neighborhood like he owned it. He walked over to me with a tight smile, one of those lawyer smiles that hides a threat behind politeness. "Chief," he said smoothly, "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." "You mean the part where your wife broke into my home?" I said. His smile twitched, but he kept it together. She believed she was performing her duties as HOA president. "I'm sure we can resolve this amicably." Behind him, Karen was wringing her hands, whispering for him to fix it. Amicably, I repeated. Like how? Should I forget she trespassed? Or how she picked my lock? Greg's tone sharpened. Let's not be dramatic. No harm was done. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. Greg, you know what we call it when someone enters a home without consent? He hesitated. Criminal trespass, I said. You'd know that better than anyone. He glanced around, aware of the watching eyes. Karen tugged at his sleeve, whispering fiercely, "Say something." He sighed, trying to regain control. Perhaps this can stay between us. No need for a formal complaint. There's already a formal complaint, I said, nodding toward my cruiser. Filed by the homeowner, me. That hit him harder than he expected. His expression faltered. Karen's voice rose behind him. You can't arrest me. I was protecting neighborhood standards. A couple of neighbors snickered. One shouted, "From what?" "A well-cut lawn." I didn't respond. I just let her talk. People like Karen reveal themselves when you give them enough silence. She kept ranting, pacing back and forth, until she said the one thing that sealed her fate. This neighborhood belongs to the HOA. I can inspect any property I deem necessary. The crowd gasped and Greg's face went pale. He muttered, "Karen, please stop talking." But she didn't. She looked right at me and said, "Even your house, Chief. You're not above the rules." "You're right," I said evenly. "I'm not above the law either. But you are definitely under it." That line hung in the air. The tension could have been sliced with a butter knife. Then Karen did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone, pretending to receive a call, and suddenly started filming me. "This man is harassing me," she said into the camera, forcing tears. "I was just doing my job and he's threatening me." I stood there, unfazed. "Karen, that camera works both ways." My body cam's rolling too. The color drained from her face again. Greg groaned, muttering under his breath, "For the love of God." That's when I heard sirens. Not mine, but the city's code enforcement vehicles pulling up. 2 officers stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking confused. "We received an anonymous complaint," one of them said. "Possible misuse of government property on this address." I turned slowly toward Karen. "Anonymous." She avoided eye contact. "Don't look at me," she said. "Coincidence." The officers checked their notes, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. I gestured for them to follow me to the garage. Inside, everything gleamed. Equipment properly logged, vehicles clean, paperwork stacked in order. "Take your time," I said. "Everything's documented." They nodded, checking serial numbers. One whispered to the other, clearly realizing they'd been sent on a wild goose chase. Outside, Karen was pacing again, chewing her nails, watching through the open door. Then I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons. "What's that?" one of the code officers asked. "My home security feed," I said. The footage popped up on screen. Karen breaking into my house, unlocking my office, holding my badge in her hand. The officers froze. "You caught this on camera?" I nodded. "Live and in color." One of them exhaled slowly, then glanced at Karen, who was standing motionless at the edge of the driveway. That's pretty clear evidence, Chief." I didn't need to say anything. The crowd had already seen enough. The officers walked back to their truck, shaking their heads, probably wondering what kind of circus this HOA was running. Greg tried to salvage it. "We'll be filing a counterclaim," he said stiffly. "For harassment, defamation, and—" He trailed off when I raised an eyebrow. "Sure," I said. "Be sure to include the part where your wife broke the lock." Karen's eyes filled with tears, not from guilt, but from rage. She shouted, "You'll regret this. Everyone will." Then she stormed back toward her house, nearly tripping on the curb. Greg followed, red-faced, muttering about damage control. I stayed there for a moment, watching them retreat. The neighbors were whispering, laughing quietly, shaking their heads. One old man called out, "Chief, need any help boarding up the HOA office?" That one got a full laugh. I smiled slightly, not answering, because I knew this wasn't over. Karen was prideful, obsessed with control. People like her never retreat quietly, they reload. I walked back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors thanking me, cheering me on. But one message stood out, from an unknown number. It said, "Enjoy your little victory. You'll see what happens next." I looked at the message for a long time, then set the phone down. Outside, Karen's porch light flickered on in broad daylight. The woman was already planning her next move, and this time, she wouldn't just trespass. She'd go to war. By sunrise the next day, the neighborhood felt tense again, like a calm lake hiding a storm underneath. I had half expected Karen to cool off, maybe hide behind her lawyer husband and hope the whole thing disappeared. But when you deal with people who live for control, you learn that humiliation only fuels them. I was in my driveway washing my cruiser when I saw Greg walking toward me, tie crooked, holding a folder. He looked tired, but his voice still carried that smug lawyer tone. "Chief," he said, "we'd like to move past yesterday. My wife has agreed to issue a statement clarifying the misunderstanding." I didn't even turn around. "A statement won't change the footage, Greg." He hesitated, shifting his weight. "She's under a lot of stress. There's no need to escalate this further." I set the hose down and faced him. "Escalate? She broke into my home, then called code enforcement on me. That's already escalated." He sighed, opening the folder like he was performing magic. "This is a notice from the HOA. We're officially launching a property audit. Random inspection of all board members' homes for compliance." I couldn't help laughing. "And I'm the first name on that list, right?" He smiled faintly. "Coincidence?" It wasn't. They wanted to flip the narrative, to make me the rule breaker, not the victim. But I'd been in this game too long. I took the notice, folded it neatly, and said, "You can inspect anytime. Just bring a warrant." His jaw tightened. "That's unnecessary." "So is trespassing," I said, and turned back to the car. He didn't reply. He just walked away, the heat of embarrassment following him like a shadow. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again, another HOA email. Only this one wasn't from Greg. It was from Karen. Subject line: "Official complaint filed against Chief Robert Lane for property misuse." The email accused me of everything from harboring unregistered equipment to running an illegal operation. It even included blurry photos of my cruiser, cropped from an angle that made it look like I'd hidden something in the back. The level of desperation was almost impressive. I sat back, took a deep breath, and decided to let her finish digging. I didn't respond. Instead, I logged every message, saved every attachment, and forwarded them quietly to the city attorney. Let her feel like she was winning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I saw her outside again, clipboard in hand, marching from driveway to driveway, taking pictures of every yard, every porch light, every flag. Some neighbors slammed their doors as soon as she approached. Others yelled at her to leave them alone. She didn't care. Power, even crumbling power, is addicting. By the time she reached my driveway again, I was already on the porch, watching. "Evening, Karen," I said, calm as ever. She flinched at my voice but forced a smile. "Just performing community duties. Everyone must comply with HOA policy." "Including breaking and entering?" I asked. "You're still harping on that?" she snapped. "You can't intimidate me. My husband is preparing legal action." "You mean Greg, the guy who accidentally emailed me his draft lawsuit last night?" Her face froze. I had, in fact, received a half-written document from his account, full of unfinished sentences and placeholders like "insert accusation here." The silence that followed was beautiful. "Enjoy your evening," I said, and went inside. But I wasn't done. I opened my computer and queued up the footage from my home cameras. The break-in, her keying, her rummaging through my files. Then I sent a short clip to the HOA group chat, just 10 seconds long, captioned, "Unauthorized entry recorded at 9:46 a.m. yesterday." I didn't add context, didn't name her. I didn't need to. Within minutes, replies exploded. Is that Karen? Did she really break into his house? She's lost it. The thread spiraled fast, her defenders scrambling while others demanded her resignation. I watched from the sidelines, quiet, patient, sipping coffee while the empire she built started crumbling. An hour later, Greg called me. You posted that footage publicly? He barked. That's defamation. Actually, I said, it's evidence. He paused. You're ruining her reputation. No, I replied. She's doing that all by herself. He hung up without another word. Around 9 that night, I got a text from one of the board members, Lisa, the only sane one in that circus. They're panicking, she wrote. Emergency meeting tomorrow. No one's defending her anymore. That told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't retreating, she was going to retaliate. And sure enough, the next morning, the HOA's email chain went crazy again. This time, from an account named Neighborhood Justice. It accused me of abusing power, harassing members, and threatening civilians. They even attached a photo of me in uniform, cropped to look menacing. I almost admired the effort. She was trying to turn a neighborhood squabble into a scandal. But she forgot one thing. Everything she sent, every lie she spread, was traceable. That night, I decided to call in a favor. My old friend and county IT director owed me one. I forwarded him the Neighborhood Justice emails, and within an hour, he confirmed the sender's IP address. It traced right back to Karen's house. When I saw the report, I just nodded. Classic Karen move, sabotage in her own backyard. But instead of confronting her, I went subtle. The next morning, I printed the report, sealed it in an envelope, and slipped it into her mailbox with a single note. Digital fingerprints don't lie. I watched from my living room window as she opened it. Her reaction was priceless. Shock, then panic, then fury. She stormed out of her house, scanned the street like she was being hunted, and went back inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled her windows. That should have ended it, but Karen was incapable of quitting. That evening, I heard her husband's car pull out of the driveway and roar down the road. Minutes later, her lights flickered on again, and I saw her creeping toward my property line with a flashlight, whispering into her phone. I couldn't hear her words, but I knew what she was doing, another inspection. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Her friend from the board, Denise, was crouched beside her, holding a measuring tape, pretending to record measurements along my fence. My security system caught every second. I zoomed in through the camera feed, watching them whisper, point, and scribble things down. Then Karen turned suddenly toward the lens, her face illuminated by the flashlight, eyes cold and determined. For a moment, it felt like she was staring right at me. I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. Let her play detective. Because now I had everything I needed, not just proof of trespassing, but proof of obsession. The kind of evidence that makes even the most stubborn HOA crumble. I shut off the monitor, poured myself a drink, and whispered to the empty room, "You've just written your own arrest report, Karen." By the next morning, the neighborhood had turned into something between a courtroom and a comedy show. The video clip of Karen's break-in had spread beyond the HOA group chat. Someone had leaked it onto a local Facebook page, and now every grocery store and cafe in town seemed to be talking about the woman who broke into the police chief's house with a clipboard. I hadn't said a word publicly, but I didn't have to. The truth had its own way of spreading. When I opened my front door to grab the paper, I saw a flyer stuck to my mailbox. It was one of those HOA circulars that usually announced bake sales or pool cleanup days, but this one had a bold title: Urgent HOA Emergency Notice. Underneath was a statement clearly written by Greg, trying to control the damage. It said, "Recent misinformation regarding the actions of HOA President Karen has been exaggerated by online sources. Please refrain from sharing unverified content." The last line made me laugh out loud. Unverified content, was a polite way of saying caught on camera. I folded the flyer and tossed it in the trash. Inside, my phone buzzed with new messages. Neighbors were sending screenshots from Facebook. Memes, jokes, even someone selling t-shirts that said, "Unauthorized Entry Squad." Karen's reputation was melting faster than ice on a summer sidewalk. Around noon, I got a knock on my door. It was Lisa again, the same board member, holding a stack of papers. "Chief," she said quietly, "the HOA board is panicking. They're holding a closed meeting tonight. Karen's trying to ban you from the neighborhood group chat and block your access to all HOA communications." I raised an eyebrow. "She can try. But that's illegal. I pay the same dues as everyone else." Lisa nodded. "I told them that. Greg said it's to maintain decorum. He's calling it a temporary suspension." I smirked. "That's cute." She hesitated, then handed me a copy of the meeting agenda. At the bottom was one topic circled in red: formal motion to remove Chief Lane from HOA membership. I looked at Lisa. "They're really doing this?" "They think if they remove you, the complaint disappears," she said. "But the other members aren't going along quietly. People are furious." "Good," I said. "Let them be." That evening, while the sun sank and the cicadas started their nightly hum, cars began pulling up outside the HOA office, a small beige building at the end of the street that looked like it had been built from leftover storage units. I didn't go. I didn't have to. The board had made the mistake of holding an open meeting without realizing that meant anyone could record it. By the time Karen took her seat at the head of the folding table, 3 neighbors already had their phones out. "This meeting will restore order," she declared, tapping her pen against her clipboard like a gavel. "Certain individuals have disrespected the authority of this organization and must face consequences." A man from the back shouted, "Like you did when you broke into his house?" The room erupted in laughter and clapping. Karen's face tightened. She banged the table. "That footage was manipulated," someone else yelled, "by your own Kering?" She tried to talk over them, insisting she'd been framed, that the video was misleading, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Even Greg looked defeated, flipping through his notes without saying a word. When the shouting reached its peak, one of the neighbors stood up, a retired judge named Martin who had lived there for 20 years. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Karen, you've brought disgrace on this community. You entered a man's home without consent, lied about it, and now you're trying to cover it up. The HOA isn't a kingdom. You're not a queen." The room went silent. Karen's eyes darted around, looking for support, but all she saw were blank faces. For the first time, she seemed small, almost fragile. "I've dedicated years to this neighborhood," she said softly. "And this is how you all repay me?" Martin didn't flinch. "With accountability?" "Yes." Someone started clapping again, and soon half the room joined in. Greg stood up, muttered that the meeting was adjourned, and hurried his wife out the side door before things got uglier. The next morning, a notice appeared on her front door. "Pending internal HOA investigation, President temporarily suspended." I didn't tape it there, but I certainly didn't mind seeing it. Later that day, another envelope arrived in my mailbox. This one from Greg. Inside was a printed letter with the heading "Cease and Desist." It accused me of distributing defamatory materials and warned of potential civil action. I set it on my counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and smiled. The letter had been written in Comic Sans. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to the district attorney's office with a short note: "Possible witness intimidation attempt, attached." Within an hour, the DA's assistant called me laughing. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. "They actually used Comic Sans?" "They did," I said. "That alone should be a misdemeanor." By the following day, the local paper had picked up the story. They ran it under the headline, "HOA President Under Fire for Breaking into Police Chief's Home." There was no photo, but everyone knew who it was. Karen's house stayed dark that night. No porch light, no movement. But I knew she wasn't done. People like her don't disappear, they plot. Sure enough, the next evening, I spotted her sneaking across the street, slipping envelopes into mailboxes. When she reached mine, I opened the door. She froze mid-step, clutching the stack of envelopes like they were evidence. "Evening, Karen," I said. "Delivering threats personally now?" "These are informational letters," she snapped. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." "Which one? Greg or the new guy?" Her eyes widened. "How do you?" I nodded toward her mailbox. "Public record. You filed an amendment this morning. You really should stop using your home Wi-Fi for HOA business." She dropped the envelopes and marched off, muttering under her breath. I bent down, picked one up, and read it. It was titled "Restoring Integrity to Our HOA," accusing me of corruption, bias, and abuse of public power. I actually laughed so hard I had to sit down on the porch step. She had no idea the storm she was summoning. By the end of the week, the City Council had scheduled an emergency review of the HOA board's conduct. An external audit was ordered. Karen's name was officially under investigation. When she saw the notice taped to her door, I caught the look on her face from across the street, pure disbelief, like she couldn't fathom that her world was collapsing. She ripped it down, tore it to pieces, and threw it into her trash bin with shaking hand. I stayed quiet, watching from my window as the wind carried a few torn pieces away. One of them floated over the fence and landed on my lawn. I picked it up later. It was the part that read, "Authority suspended pending investigation." I smiled, folded it into my pocket, and said to myself, "I told you, Karen. Game on means game over." The quiet didn't last long because Karen was the kind of person who believed that losing control was worse than losing money or pride. By the end of that week, she was back on her porch, pacing with a phone in her hand and a stack of papers under her arm, barking orders like she was running a government agency. Her HOA suspension didn't stop her, it just made her more dangerous. I knew that look, the determination of someone who thought she was on a holy mission. That night, at exactly 9:30, the noise complaints started. First came a text from a number I didn't recognize, lawn mower operating past curfew hours. Then, a minute later, another. Excessive vehicle noise reported from your property. I stood at my window, staring out at the still, silent street. My mower hadn't moved in 2 days. My cruiser hadn't started since noon. It was all fabricated, but she didn't care. She was building a record. Within 20 minutes, I heard a knock on my door. 2 community patrol officers stood outside, both looking apologetic. "Sorry, Chief," one of them said, "we got a complaint about loud noise." I stepped aside and gestured toward the yard. "Do you hear anything?" They listened for a second, exchanged looks, and shook their heads. "Didn't think so," I said. "You can log it as another false report." They nodded and left, muttering about how they'd been getting more HOA calls in 1 week than all month combined. By morning, Karen had filed 4 more complaints. Trash bin out too early, driveway too reflective, flag too large, and mailbox out of proportion with community standards. It was almost poetic how desperate she sounded in those emails, listing every made-up offense she could find. But instead of reacting, I did what any cop would do. I started a file. Every message, every timestamp, every signature from her name went into a single folder labeled Karen Operations. When she realized I wasn't taking the bait, she upped her game. 3 days later, she called for an emergency HOA meeting. Of course, she wasn't technically president anymore, but she didn't seem to care about technicalities. She sent out invitations claiming it was a private HOA matter that excluded me by name. That alone was a violation of bylaws, but I decided to let her dig deeper. On the night of the meeting, a line of cars filled the small parking lot by the HOA office. Curious neighbors stood outside, whispering and recording on their phones. I stayed home, watching through my live drone feed as Karen strutted into the building like she'd just been reinstated. She wore a red blazer this time, as if the color itself could make her look authoritative again. Inside, she started her speech loud and proud. "We cannot let outsiders destroy the order of our community," she said, slamming her hand on the table for effect. "We must stand united against those who abuse power." Her friend Denise clapped like a trained seal, but most of the room sat in awkward silence. Someone asked, "Didn't you break into his house?" She ignored the question. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "He's using his badge to intimidate me and manipulate the system." The irony was so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. She went on for nearly an hour, waving around fake paperwork, claiming I was using police resources for personal revenge. Her grand finale was a proposal to ban all law enforcement vehicles from HOA streets, citing them as visual intimidation devices. That's when one of the neighbors, Lisa again, stood up and said, "Karen, do you hear yourself? You're trying to ban police from our own neighborhood." Karen snapped back, "This is about preserving peace." Lisa didn't back down. "You've turned this place into a circus." The argument escalated fast. Phones came out. Cameras started rolling. Karen shouted about authority. Lisa shouted about sanity. And then, like clockwork, 2 police officers entered through the door. They weren't mine, but they recognized me from my badge photo on the wall. "Who called this meeting?" one of them asked. Karen raised her hand, trying to smile. "I did. We're handling official HOA business." The officer looked around. "Ma'am, you're not HOA president anymore." The room burst into laughter. Karen's face went from red to purple. She fumbled with her papers, stammering, "That's temporary. I'm still acting president until further notice." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, this is a private property meeting without authorization. You're trespassing." That word again. It haunted her now. She froze, glancing toward the cameras as they caught every second. One officer escorted her outside while the other closed down the meeting. The videos hit the neighborhood chat within an hour. Karen yelling, officers leading her out, neighbors cheering. It was internet gold. I watched the clips quietly from home, not out of spite, but because I knew exactly what was coming next. Pride like hers doesn't fade, it flares. The following morning, Greg showed up at my doorstep again. His suit was wrinkled this time, his tone bitter. "This is harassment," he said. "You're humiliating my wife publicly." I looked at him calmly. "I didn't arrest her. I didn't film her. I didn't post the video. She did all that on her own." He rubbed his forehead. "Do you realize how much damage this is causing? Then stop trying to defend the indefensible," I said. He sighed, muttered something about regretting this neighborhood, and walked away. But I wasn't naive. I knew they'd try again. That evening, as I reviewed my security footage, I noticed something strange. Someone had tampered with my mailbox camera. The feed went static for 3 minutes, then came back blurry. I checked the backup footage from a secondary drone angle, and sure enough, there she was. Karen herself, wearing sunglasses at night, trying to unscrew the camera with a screwdriver. It was almost tragic how predictable she'd become. The next day, I filed a report, not out of vengeance but procedure. Repeated harassment, tampering with security devices, multiple false complaints, all backed by evidence. That's when my cousin, the county sheriff, called. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked. "She's already digging her grave," I said. "I'm just marking where she buried the shovel." He chuckled. "Give her enough rope, huh?" "Exactly." For the next week, I kept quiet, doing my job as usual while Karen drowned in her own chaos. But late one night, I saw her outside again, flashlight in hand, creeping toward my driveway. This time she wasn't measuring. She was planting something, a fake violation notice, taped to my garage door with shaking hands. She looked around nervously, then hurried back across the street. I walked out slowly, peeled the paper off the door, and read it. Notice of property noncompliance. Pending fines. Signed by HOA Interim President Karen. That was all I needed. The next morning, I filled out a warrant request and set it on my desk. It was time to stop playing defense. The sun rose over the cul-de-sac like it did every other day, but that morning the air carried a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes before something breaks. I'd already submitted the paperwork, the kind that doesn't get filled out lightly, and I knew what it meant. Once that warrant got processed, Karen's long list of neighborhood crusades would finally meet the law she'd ignored for so long. Still, part of me hoped she'd stop before it came to that. I'd seen people self-destruct before, but never with such suburban enthusiasm. Around 10 that morning, my phone buzzed with a call from dispatch. "Chief, you're gonna want to see this," the officer said. "We just got another complaint from your HOA. Says you've got hazardous materials stored on your property." I sighed. "Let me guess. Filed by a Karen?" The officer chuckled softly. "Exactly. Same handwriting too. Want us to send someone?" "No need," I said. "I'll handle it personally." After hanging up, I checked my security feed. There she was again, sneaking along the fence line, camera in hand, snapping pictures like she was on a spy mission. Her movements were slower this time, more careful. She wasn't just trying to catch something. She was looking for proof to justify her own story. That's when I decided to set the trap. I walked outside, calm and casual, pretending not to notice her lurking near the property line. "Morning, Karen," I said, voice light. She jumped, then straightened her posture. "Just checking the easement measurements," she said, waving her clipboard. "We've had reports that your fence encroaches on HOA land." "That's city land," I corrected. "And I already checked the boundary with the county last year." She smirked. "Well, my measurements say otherwise." "Then why don't we verify them?" I said, stepping closer. Her confidence wavered just a bit. "What do you mean?" I pointed to the small black camera mounted on the fence post. "This feed is live, connected straight to city recorders. If you're making official HOA claims, we'll need to log your inspection for evidence." Her eyes darted toward the lens, and for the first time, she looked nervous. I don't consent to being recorded," she stammered. "You're on my property line, Karen. You don't have a say." She froze for a long second, then turned abruptly and walked away, muttering something about harassment. I didn't stop her. Instead, I opened my phone and sent the footage to the county attorney with a note that said, "Pattern continues." That night, the sheriff stopped by. My cousin, Sheriff Dale, leaned against the porch railing with his coffee and a tired grin. "You sure you want to pull the trigger on this?" he asked. "You've got enough to bury her." I looked out at the darkened street. Karen's porch light was off, but her blinds flickered every few seconds like she was peeking through them. "She's crossed every line," I said. "She's not going to stop until someone stops her." Dale nodded slowly. "Then let's do this right. I'll have the paperwork ready in the morning." I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside, the crunch of gravel, the faint flick of a flashlight beam moving near my garage. I checked the security feed, and there she was again, wearing dark clothes this time, a baseball cap pulled low. She crouched near the side of the house, pointing her flashlight at my electrical box, taking photos. I watched in disbelief as she pulled out a piece of chalk and marked something on my wall. She was trying to stage a code violation. It was like watching someone fall off a cliff in slow motion, and all I could do was record it. The next morning, I called Dale. "She was on my property again last night," I said. "Got her on camera marking my wall." "That's enough," he said firmly. "We'll move forward today." At 9:30, 2 patrol cars parked quietly at the corner of the street. Dale and another deputy approached my porch, the arrest warrant folded neatly in Dale's hand. "You want to be the one to deliver it?" he asked. I nodded. "She earned it." Across the street, Karen's door swung open before we even knocked. She stood there, hair messy, eyes wild, wearing a robe and clutching her phone. "I know why you're here," she shouted. "You can't silence me." "Karen," I said evenly, "you have the right to remain silent, but you might want to start practicing." Her face went pale. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. Not anymore, Dale said, stepping forward. You've been suspended and charged with multiple offenses: criminal trespass, harassment, and falsifying public complaints. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. The neighbors began to gather again, drawn by the noise. She looked around, realizing that this was the moment she'd feared most, being seen without control. "This is abuse of power," she cried as Dale gently turned her around and placed the cuffs on her wrists. "No," I said. "This is the law finally catching up." The crowd murmured, cameras out again, phones recording every second. Someone actually started clapping. Others whispered, "It's about time." As Dale read her rights, she kept yelling about her authority, about how she represented the community. But the more she talked, the smaller her voice sounded. When she was finally guided toward the patrol car, she turned back to glare at me, eyes full of venom. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you've won?" I didn't answer. The door closed, the car drove off, and the street slowly returned to its quiet state. But the silence felt different this time. It wasn't the tense calm of anticipation, it was relief. Neighbors came over one by one, shaking my hand, thanking me. Lisa stood by my fence, smiling sadly. "You did what needed to be done," she said. She wasn't going to stop. "Maybe now we can all breathe again," I said. "At least for a while." That night, I sat in my office, reviewing the footage one last time before turning it over to the DA. Karen's voice echoed faintly through the speakers, her muttered threats, her whispered plans, the sound of her breaking her own illusion of power. I didn't take joy in it. I'd seen too many people ruin their lives out of pride. But what made this different was that her pride had poisoned an entire neighborhood, and now that poison had finally been drawn out. As I turned off the monitor, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Greg. It said, "You've destroyed my wife's life. Hope you're proud." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "She destroyed it herself. I just enforced the law." When I hit send, I looked out the window toward their dark, empty house and whispered, "Game over, Karen." The next morning felt surreal, like the whole neighborhood had woken up from a long nightmare. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice after weeks of tension and whispers. The patrol cars were gone, but the image of Karen being handcuffed on her front lawn lingered in everyone's mind like a scene burned into memory. People passed each other on their morning walks with cautious smiles, unsure whether it was okay to feel relieved yet. I sat on my porch sipping coffee, half expecting her to appear again out of nowhere with that same clipboard and self-righteous glare. But for the first time in months, her house looked abandoned. Curtains closed, mailbox overflowing, and a for sale sign half leaning against her fence. Then, around 10 o'clock, a local news van pulled onto the street. 2 reporters stepped out, camera ready. I'd seen this before, small-town gossip turning into prime-time entertainment. They weren't there for me. They were there for the story everyone was already calling the HOA president who got arrested by her own chief. I watched from the porch as they knocked on her door. No answer. They filmed the empty driveway, zoomed in on the suspended notice still taped to the HOA office window, and then spotted me across the street. "Chief Lane," one of them called, "mind if we get a statement?" I hesitated, then stood and walked over. "No comment," I said simply. "Just doing my job." They tried to press for more, asking if there was truth to the rumors that Karen had falsified complaints and forged documents. I repeated the same line, "No comment," and went back to my porch. The next day, the story hit the local paper and then the regional news. Headlines read, "HOA president arrested for trespassing on police chief's property and community divided after HOA scandal." Some articles painted her as a tyrant, others framed her as a misunderstood woman under pressure. But the footage spoke for itself, her breaking in, the warrant, the arrest. Public sympathy wasn't on her side. That night, I got another call from Sheriff Dale. "You've officially gone viral, cousin," he said, half amused. They're playing the footage on 3 channels. You're famous now. I didn't ask to be, I replied. You know how this goes, attention fades, but grudges don't. You worried about Greg? He asked. No, I said. I'm worried about what comes next when Pride doesn't have anywhere left to hide. And I was right to worry. 3 days later, she was out on bail. I knew the moment she got home because my cameras picked her up stepping out of a cab, still in that same red blazer she'd worn to the HOA meeting, now wrinkled and stained. She didn't wave to the neighbors. She didn't look around. She just stormed straight into her house and slammed the door. That night, the lights in her windows stayed on until morning. The next day, her husband's car disappeared. Word spread that Greg had moved out temporarily, claiming he needed space. It wasn't hard to imagine why. The footage, the headlines, the online memes, everything had humiliated them publicly. But humiliation is a dangerous fuel, and Karen wasn't done burning. By Friday, I started receiving anonymous letters again, cut-out newspaper words glued to paper like some kind of amateur ransom note. Abuse of power, one said. Payback is coming, said another. I turned each one in, logged them as evidence, and tightened surveillance around my home. Then one evening, just before sunset, I noticed a shadow near my garage. When I stepped outside, I found a pile of trash dumped by the fence. Broken branches, old papers, and what looked like paint cans. Someone had clearly tried to make it look like a code violation. But my cameras caught everything again. There she was, hooded, sneaking out at dusk, dragging garbage bags across the street and dumping them by my fence. It was sad, really, seeing her reduced to petty vandalism. I filed another report, forwarded the footage, and didn't even feel anger anymore, just exhaustion. The next morning, Dale showed up shaking his head. She's losing it, Rob, he said. Her lawyer's begging her to stop, but she won't listen. She's addicted to the fight, I said. Take that away, and she's got nothing left. He nodded. Still want to press charges for the dumping? Not yet, I said. Let her hang herself with her own rope a little longer. And hang herself she did. That weekend, she tried to hold another HOA meeting, this time through a live stream from her living room, calling it The Real Story. She sat in front of a bookshelf, reading from a script, claiming she'd been set up by corrupt authorities, and that the footage was edited. But the internet is unforgiving. Within minutes, her stream filled with laughing emojis, people commenting, "We saw the video, Karen," and "You're trespassing online now." She ended the stream abruptly, tears in her eyes. The next morning, Greg filed for separation. I didn't cheer, but I didn't pity her either. Some people can only learn through consequences, and she was living every one she'd earned. A week later, the court date arrived. The courtroom was small, packed with neighbors and local reporters. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, staring straight ahead, avoiding everyone's eyes. When the judge entered, she stood stiffly, clutching her purse like a life raft. The DA presented the footage, the reports, the fake violation notices, the harassment emails. Karen's lawyer tried to argue she'd acted, out of concern for community safety. The judge interrupted, saying flatly, "Concern doesn't include breaking into a law enforcement officer's home." That line made the room go dead silent. The verdict came fast. Guilty of trespassing, harassment, and filing false reports. Community service, fines, and an official order removing her permanently from the HOA. When she heard it, her composure cracked. She turned toward me as they escorted her out, eyes wet and burning with something between hatred and heartbreak. "You destroyed everything I built," she said. "No," I replied softly. "You destroyed it yourself." She didn't answer. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter again, like a storm had finally passed. People came out of their houses, chatting, laughing for the first time in months. Someone even brought fireworks, small ones, just to celebrate the peace. I watched quietly from my porch, the sound of laughter echoing through the street. For once, no one was complaining, no one was arguing, and no one was afraid to hang a flag or park a truck where they wanted. But as I looked across the street at her dark house, curtains drawn and driveway empty, I couldn't shake one thought. People like Karen don't just disappear. They wait. They simmer. They find new ways to make noise. And as much as I wanted to believe it was over, I knew deep down that she wasn't done yet. The days that followed her sentencing felt almost unreal, as if the neighborhood had been transported to another dimension where silence and civility actually existed. The lawns were mowed without complaints, the mailboxes stood straight and uninspected, and no one was being fined for their curtain colors. But peace has a strange fragility, especially when built on the ruins of pride. I knew Karen wouldn't stay quiet forever. Even when stripped of her title and forced into community service, she had that glint in her eye, the kind that meant she was already rewriting the story in her head to make herself the hero again. The first sign came a week later when I noticed a group of reporters standing outside the grocery store parking lot interviewing random neighbors. One of them waved me down. "Chief Lane," she said, "is it true the HOA president is claiming she was framed?" I kept walking, pretending I hadn't heard. But that night I saw the report on television. There she was, standing outside the courthouse in a plain sweater and sunglasses, surrounded by cameras. Her tone was calm, but her words dripped with poison. "This was a coordinated attack to silence me," she said. "They twisted everything. I was only trying to protect our neighborhood from corruption." She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone watching knew exactly who she was talking about. The comments on the station's online page were divided. Some people calling her delusional, others claiming I'd gone too far. It didn't bother me, not at first. But then I started getting calls at the station. Random strangers demanding I resign, accusing me of abusing power. Someone even mailed a fake complaint letter to City Hall under an alias, repeating her same narrative. She wasn't just defending herself, she was trying to rebuild her influence, this time by weaponizing sympathy. The irony was painful. The same woman who had bullied an entire community was now playing victim to the world. I didn't respond publicly, but I could feel the pressure building. Even my captain asked, "You sure you want to keep quiet?" People start filling blanks when the truth stays silent. "Let them talk," I said. "Evidence doesn't fade just because gossip grows." Still, it got harder to ignore when local tabloids picked up the story. "Small-town HOA president claims cover-up by police chief," one headline read. The photo showed me walking into the courthouse, mid-blink, making me look guilty of something I didn't do. I knew she'd fed them those images. It was her way of clawing back relevance. But if she wanted attention, I could give her something more than headlines. 2 nights later, a call came from the community center. The officer on duty said Karen had shown up at her assigned service hours, only to spend the entire time handing out flyers with her version of events printed in bold type. "Citizens deserve the truth," she'd written. "The HOA didn't fall apart because of me, it fell apart because of him." The audacity almost made me laugh. Even in punishment, she was campaigning. I told the officer to collect one of the flyers for evidence. When I read it, I noticed something strange. Near the bottom, there was a list of witnesses who supposedly supported her story. Among them were names of real residents, but also one that stood out. Lisa's. The same Lisa who had testified against her. That was the last straw. I went straight to Lisa's house that evening, and she looked horrified when I showed her the flyer. "She forged my name?" Lisa said. "That's insane." "She's not done yet," I replied. "She's trying to make people believe she has support." Lisa shook her head. "She came by earlier today. Left a basket on my porch. Said it was a peace offering." I frowned. "Did you open it?" "No," Lisa said quickly. "After everything, I didn't trust it." We went outside and looked at the basket together, wrapped in cellophane decorated with ribbons. From a distance, it looked harmless, but when I got closer, I saw something odd. A small recorder taped to the bottom, light blinking faintly. Karen had tried to bug her gift. I took photos, documented everything, and sent it to the DA that same night. The next morning, I heard back from the probation officer. "That's a violation of her community service terms," he said. "She's not supposed to contact witnesses or victims." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll handle it," he said. "But she's running out of chances." Later that afternoon, patrol cars returned to the neighborhood, this time to escort her for questioning. Neighbors watched again from their driveways, shaking their heads in disbelief. It was almost tragic, almost. As she was led to the car, she spotted me standing near my gate. She stopped, staring across the street, eyes dark and hollow. "You think you've beaten me," she said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "But you haven't. They'll see what you really are." I didn't reply. There was no point in arguing with someone who lived in her own fiction. She was taken away again, this time without the spectacle of cameras, just the dull routine of reality finally setting in. For a few days, things went quiet again. The street felt normal, almost peaceful. But one evening, as I was locking my garage, I saw headlights pull up outside her house. Greg stepped out, looking worn out and thinner than before. He went inside for a while, then came out with 2 suitcases. He didn't look back as he drove off. The next morning, a moving truck arrived. Her furniture, her boxes, her life, hauled out piece by piece. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering to each other. I stayed on my porch until the last item was gone. By afternoon, the house stood empty, echoing with the ghosts of her chaos. That evening, Lisa walked over carrying a bottle of lemonade. "So, it's finally over," she said. I nodded slowly. "Maybe." "You think she'll come back?" she asked. I stared at the quiet house across the street, its "for sale" sign swaying in the breeze. "Not here," I said. "But people like her don't stop. They just find a new neighborhood to rule." Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "Well, let's hope wherever she goes next, there's another chief waiting." I smiled faintly. "If there isn't, there will be soon enough." The sun sank behind the rooftops, the sky painted gold and orange, and for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace that didn't feel temporary. Still, as the streetlights flickered on, a small voice in my head whispered what I already knew. Karen might have left our neighborhood, but she'd never really leave the story. People like her don't fade away. They just wait for the next spotlight to find them. It had been 3 quiet months since Karen's moving truck rolled away, and for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt alive again. Kids played basketball in the driveways, families grilled in backyards without worrying about fines for unauthorized smoke, and no one had to look over their shoulder for a clipboard patrol. But even peace has echoes, and hers lingered like a stain that wouldn't wash off. Every now and then, someone would mention her name in passing, like testing the air to see if saying it might make her reappear. I had almost stopped thinking about her when an envelope showed up in my mailbox one crisp morning. No return address, just my name printed neatly in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line typed in bold. "I forgive you, even if you never apologize." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting at the bottom, faint pencil marks near the fold, told me everything. Karen. I didn't know whether to laugh or be uneasy. Forgive me for what? For enforcing the law? For catching her in the act? The arrogance was still there, just quieter now, dressed in the disguise of humility. I set the letter aside, figuring it was the last gasp of a deflated ego, but I kept it in a drawer just in case. The next few days passed uneventfully until I got a call from Lisa, who sounded both amused and worried. "Chief, you're not gonna believe this," she said. "Karen's back in town." My stomach dropped a little. "Back? Here?" "Not exactly here," Lisa said. "She bought a place over in Crestwood, just a few miles away. My friend's cousin lives there, and saw her unloading boxes yesterday." I didn't say anything for a moment. I had half expected her to resurface somewhere, but not this close. "Maybe she just wants to start over," Lisa said softly. I wished I could believe that, but I knew Karen too well. She didn't move somewhere to start over, she moved to start again. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the dark sky, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and thinking about what she might be planning. People like her couldn't live without control. If she had a new neighborhood, she'd already be looking for a new committee, a new set of rules, a new list of names to boss around. I didn't plan to get involved. She wasn't my problem anymore. But 2 weeks later, she made herself one. It started small, with a letter mailed to City Hall. Anonymous, of course, but written in that same stiff, formal tone I'd seen 100 times before. It accused me of misconduct and retaliation during the HOA investigation. She had changed the story again, painting herself as a whistleblower instead of a criminal. The letter was dismissed immediately. No evidence, no credibility, but it was enough to stir whispers at the station. One of the younger officers even asked me, half joking, "Chief, what did you do to that poor woman?" I didn't laugh. The second sign came a week later when an online article appeared on a fringe website. "Small-town cop abuses power against HOA president," the headline read. The article quoted an unnamed source close to the case, who described me as vindictive and dangerous. It was her voice, her wording, even if she hadn't signed it. She was trying to rewrite the past one blog post at a time. I ignored it publicly, but privately I began documenting again. Every article, every post, every whisper. I wasn't going to be blindsided this time. Then one night, just before midnight, I heard tires crunching on gravel outside my house. I turned off the light and looked through the window. A black sedan idled near the end of my driveway, headlights off. It stayed there for nearly 5 minutes, then drove away slowly. The next morning, I checked my cameras and froze when I saw her. Karen, sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight at my house. She didn't step out, didn't do anything reckless, just sat there like she was studying the scene of a crime she'd once committed. I replayed the footage over and over, each time feeling the same chill crawl up my spine. The nerve it took to come back, to sit there like a ghost haunting her own downfall, was beyond comprehension. That evening, I called Dale and told him what happened. "You want me to put a patrol on your street?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not yet. She wants a reaction. Let her think she's invisible." "You sure?" he asked. "You've seen what she's capable of." "Exactly," I said. "And I know how she moves." For the next week, I watched closely. She didn't return, at least not visibly, but I started noticing other signs. Phone calls that hung up as soon as I answered, emails with blank subjects, cars idling near intersections longer than normal. Maybe I was paranoid, or maybe she was just that patient. Then one afternoon, Lisa stopped by with a box in her arms. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, setting it on my table. Inside were flyers, freshly printed, advertising a new community association, Crestwood Neighborhood Unity Group. At the bottom of each flyer was the organizer's name, Karen R. I let out a slow breath. "She really can't help herself," I said. Lisa nodded. "My friend says she's already hosting meetings. Same playbook, rules, fines, inspections. She's calling herself the coordinator, but it's the same thing all over again." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. It's only a matter of time before she picks her next target. "You gonna do anything?" Lisa asked. I shook my head. "Not unless she crosses another line. I'm not her story anymore." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. People like her always circle back to the thing that exposes them, drawn by obsession and wounded pride. Late that night, I sat by my desk, the old letter still in the drawer, and stared at the camera feed of the street outside. Everything looked calm. But for the first time in months, I felt that same uneasy stillness I'd felt the morning she first walked into my house uninvited. The kind of stillness that comes before chaos. Somewhere out there, she was smiling again, probably planning her next move, convinced she could rebuild the kingdom she lost. I knew better. Pride had already written her ending. All that was left was to wait for her to turn the page. It was early spring when the final chapter of this whole mess began, the kind of morning that felt too calm for what was coming. The neighborhood had moved on, the grass greener, the fences freshly painted, and the echoes of Karen's chaos fading into background noise. People still mentioned her name sometimes, always in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might summon her again. I had stopped checking the cameras as obsessively, stopped expecting a new letter or an unexpected car idling at the end of my driveway. But trouble has a way of sneaking in when you stop watching for it. The first hint came from a rookie officer at the station, who walked up to my desk holding a thin envelope. "This came for you, Chief," he said. Looked official, but no return address. I opened it and found a folded document inside, an application for a civilian administrative position at the precinct. The name at the top froze me in place. Karen Reynolds. For a long moment I just stared at it, half expecting it to be some kind of prank. But it wasn't. The paperwork was real, the application properly filed, even the background check form attached. She had applied for a desk job at the same department whose chief had her arrested. The insanity of it made my stomach twist, not in anger but in disbelief. I took the file straight to the HR office, where the clerk looked just as confused as I did. "She passed the preliminary review," the clerk said hesitantly. "Everything checks out, she meets the qualifications." I almost laughed. Qualifications for what? Harassing her coworkers. The clerk shrugged helplessly. "We can't deny her without cause. It's an open application. You're the reviewing officer." I left the office without saying a word, the file tucked under my arm like a live grenade. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen staring at it on the table, the name printed neatly across the top in that same sharp handwriting that had once filled my mailbox with fake violations. The audacity was staggering. After everything, after the arrest, the court case, the fines, the move, she still found a way to crawl back into my life, not through confrontation this time, but through bureaucracy. It was her last game of control. I knew her mind well enough by now to see the pattern. She wasn't applying for the job because she wanted to work. She was applying because she wanted proximity, access, the ability to say she had authority again, even if it was just behind a desk. It was her twisted idea of victory. I could have dismissed the application outright, citing conflict of interest, but part of me wanted to see how far she'd take it. So I scheduled the interview. The next morning, she walked through the glass doors of the station like she belonged there. Same perfect posture, same calm expression that always tried to mask chaos underneath. But she looked older now, a little worn down, the kind of tired that comes from fighting battles you know you've already lost. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "Chief Lane," she said. "Long time no see." "Not long enough," I said quietly. "Let's talk." We walked into the conference room. She sat down neatly, crossing her legs, hands folded in her lap. "I believe in second chances," she said smoothly. "And I thought perhaps this department might as well." "You broke into my home," I said flatly. "You harassed half this town. Why on earth would you think I'd hire you?" She didn't flinch. "Because you're fair. You enforce rules, not emotions. Isn't that what you always said?" Her words were deliberate, rehearsed. She was baiting me, testing whether I'd show anger. I didn't. "You know I have to forward this to HR," I said finally. "They'll make the final call." "Of course," she said, that familiar smugness returning to her tone. "I'm sure you'll handle it professionally." When the meeting ended, she stood, smoothed her blazer, and looked me straight in the eye. "You can't erase me, Chief," she said quietly. "You can't rewrite what people think. You may have won the battle, but you'll always be the villain in someone's story." I didn't respond. She turned and walked out, heels clicking against the tile, her silhouette shrinking until the door closed behind her. I stood there for a long while, the echo of her words hanging in the air. Maybe she was right in a way. Every story needs a villain, and sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as the version people choose to believe. But in the end, the law doesn't run on feelings. It runs on fact. The HR department rejected her application the next day, citing prior criminal conduct and conflict of interest. I didn't celebrate. I just filed the paperwork quietly, stamped it, and put it away. That night, when I walked outside, the air smelled like rain. Across the street, Lisa waved from her porch. "Heard she tried to apply at your department," she said. "Unbelievable. Nothing about her surprises me anymore," I replied. "Guess she couldn't resist one more round." Lisa shook her head. "Some people never change." "No," I said, "they just change tactics." For a while we stood there in the soft drizzle, the sound of rain tapping on rooftops like a gentle drumbeat washing away the last traces of her chaos. I thought about everything that had happened, the break-in, the false reports, the arrest, the endless games. It was strange how something that started as a simple trespass had turned into a war of pride, one that left scars on everyone who got too close. But standing there under the rain, I realized it had also taught me something. Power without accountability always collapses, no matter how tightly someone clings to it. Control built on fear eventually crumbles beneath its own weight. And no matter how long it takes, truth always finds its way to the surface. A few days later, I got one last letter. This time it wasn't typed. It was handwritten in shaky penmanship, mailed from an address 2 towns away. It said, "I'm leaving for good. I hope you finally have your peace. Maybe now I can find mine too." I read it twice, then set it on the counter. There was no anger in the words, no arrogance, just exhaustion. I didn't know if she meant it or if it was another act, but for the first time, I hoped she was telling the truth. The next morning, her old house was bought by a young couple with kids, the kind of family that brought life back into the street. They painted the porch, planted flowers, and hung a wind chime that tinkled softly in the breeze. Every time I heard it, I thought of how far the neighborhood had come, from fear to freedom, from chaos to calm. And as I stood by my gate watching the sun rise over the roofs, I realized the war was finally over. Not with a bang or a final confrontation, but with silence, the kind that means peace has truly returned.